She was only 4 years old when she vanished, taken in broad daylight from a quiet playground while her mother stood just steps away. For 18 years, Emma Bennett was a name on a cold case file, a child lost with no answers. Then, in 2005, a young woman with no memory of her past returned to the exact playground where it all began, guided only by dreams she couldn't explain. How does a child disappear from a close-knit community without a trace? And how does she find her way back without knowing why? Portland, Oregon in 1987 was a different world. No cell phones linked anxious parents to their children. No surveillance cameras watched over neighborhood parks. Missing children cases relied on witness memory, hand-drawn sketches, and physical searches that stretched across miles of uncertain ground. The Amber Alert system wouldn't exist for another 9 years. Information spread slowly, through newspapers, local television news, and word of mouth that traveled from porch to porch. Linda Bennett was 28 years old that spring, working part-time as a receptionist at a dental office to make ends meet. She'd been raising Emma alone since her divorce 2 years earlier, when Emma's father had moved to California and gradually faded from their lives. Linda was devoted to her daughter, perhaps overprotective at times, working hard to give Emma the stability that came from knowing she was loved completely. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon after work, Linda brought Emma to Riverside Park. It was their time, their ritual, their proof that even though there were only two of them, they were enough. Emma was 4 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair that Linda braided each morning, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a slight lisp when she said her S sounds. She was curious, talkative, and obsessed with the color red. Her red quilted jacket had become almost a uniform. She insisted on wearing it even when it wasn't quite cold enough, because as she often explained with great seriousness, it had the best pockets. On May 12th, she wore that red jacket over a white t-shirt decorated with a rainbow blue corduroy pants and white sneakers with Velcro straps that she'd learned to fasten all by herself. Every morning in the Bennett household began the same way. Linda would make chocolate chip pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse ears, and Emma would stand on a step stool at the stove, helping to flip them with intense concentration. "Team Bennett makes the best breakfast," Linda would say, and Emma would echo with delight, "Team Bennett." It was their ritual, their anthem, their reminder that two could be a complete family. That Tuesday morning started like any other. It would be the last ordinary day they would ever have. Emma woke at 6:45, singing "You Are My Sunshine" in her bedroom with the unself-conscious joy of a child who believed the world was safe. She padded into Linda's room and climbed into bed for 5 more minutes of cuddles before they faced the day. At 7:15, Emma insisted on wearing her red jacket despite Linda's gentle suggestion that it might be too warm. They negotiated, as they often did, and the jacket stayed on. Breakfast was their usual Mickey Mouse pancakes, with Emma carefully counting out chocolate chips and pressing them into the batter. She drank orange juice from her favorite yellow cup decorated with daisies. Before they left for daycare, Emma tucked her small stuffed rabbit, named Bun Bun, with a pink ribbon tied around its neck, into her jacket pocket. "So Bun Bun can go to the park too," she explained. That rabbit would never be found. Linda dropped Emma at Little Sprouts daycare at 8 o'clock and headed to work. Emma spent the morning finger painting, creating a picture she proudly described as "Mommy and me at the park," though it was mostly red and blue smears that only a mother could interpret. She ate graham crackers at snack time, listened to a story about Curious George, and was, according to her teacher Mrs. Rodriguez, chatty and happy all morning. At noon, Linda picked Emma up. They walked the 6 blocks home, Emma skipping part of the way, stopping to examine interesting rocks and point at birds. Lunch was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with strawberry jam, carrot sticks that Emma ate 3 of and left 2, apple slices, and a glass of milk that Emma accidentally spilled, crying briefly until Linda reassured her that accidents happen and everything was okay. After lunch came quiet time. Emma didn't nap anymore, but she looked at books on her bed while Linda folded laundry and paid bills. Emma flipped through Where the Wild Things Are, the book they'd bought together at Powell's the previous Sunday. At 3:15, Linda asked the question Emma had been waiting for all day. "Want to go to the park?" Emma jumped up. "Yes, yes, swings." They walked the 3 blocks to Riverside Park hand in hand, Emma swinging Linda's arm, then skipping ahead, then circling back. The air was cool but not cold, the sky still overcast, the ground damp but not muddy. When they arrived at 3:30, three other children were there. Two boys shooting baskets, a toddler in the sandbox with his mother. Emma ran straight to the swings, her red jacket bright against the gray sky. Linda pushed her for several minutes, Emma shouting higher, higher, and laughing each time she swooped forward. At 3:42, another mother arrived. Patricia Novak lived 2 streets over, and she had a question about the school fundraiser for Riverside Elementary. She approached Linda at the swings, and they began talking. Emma was still swinging, pumping her legs, trying to go higher on her own. "Mommy, watch this," Emma shouted, attempting to swing standing up. "Be careful, baby. Sit down on your bottom," Linda called back. Emma giggled and sat back down properly. Those were the last words Linda heard her daughter speak. For approximately 30 seconds, Linda's attention was divided. She turned slightly away from the swings to face Patricia fully, looking down at a fundraiser flyer. The distance between them was perhaps 12 feet, no more. The basketball boys were absorbed in their game. The mother in the sandbox had her back turned, focused on her toddler. For less than a minute, no one was watching Emma with full attention. When Linda turned back toward the swings, her heart already beginning to flutter with an instinct she didn't yet understand. The swing was still moving. The chains swayed gently, the seat rocking back and forth in a pattern consistent with someone having just been there. But Emma was gone. The red jacket was nowhere visible. Linda's first thought was that Emma was hiding, playing a game. She called out, "Emma? Emma? Honey?" When there was no answer, she walked quickly to the slide, checked behind it, called, louder, "Emma." Patricia noticed Linda's rising panic and began helping, calling Emma's name, checking the bathroom structure, the sandbox area. Her son hadn't seen Emma leave. The basketball boys, when asked, both said no. They hadn't seen anything. Linda ran to the parking area. No Emma, no suspicious vehicles. Patricia ran to nearby houses, knocking on doors. An elderly neighbor came out, concerned but unable to help. He hadn't seen Emma. Another neighbor began searching her yard. By 3:51, 7 or 8 people were searching, calling Emma's name through the neighborhood, checking yards and garages and bushes. Someone drove around nearby blocks slowly, hoping to spot a flash of red. At 3:56, Linda ran the 3 blocks home, praying somehow Emma had walked there alone, even though she knew a 4-year-old wouldn't do that. The house was empty. Linda grabbed the phone with shaking hands and called the police. "My daughter is missing from Riverside Park," she said, her voice already breaking. "She's 4 years old. She was on the swing." I looked away for 1 second. "Please, you have to help me find her." By 4:05, when the police dispatch officially logged the call, approximately 15 to 20 neighbors were searching. Linda's voice on the emergency tape, later released to media, was frantic and breathless. "My daughter Emma, she's 4. She was on the swing." I looked away for 1 second. "She's gone. She's wearing a red jacket. Please help me, please." The first police unit arrived at Riverside Park at 4:10. By then, Emma had been missing for 25 minutes. The swing had stopped moving. The playground was swarming with neighbors calling her name. And somewhere in Portland, a 4-year-old girl in a red jacket, who had left her stuffed rabbit in her pocket, was being driven away from everything she knew. By nightfall, those 25 minutes would become hours. The hours would become days, and the days would stretch into 18 silent years. Portland police treated Emma's disappearance as an abduction from the first moment. A 4-year-old doesn't run away. Officers Daniels and Kim established a perimeter, called for additional units, and within 30 minutes, Riverside Park was a crime scene. Detective Thomas Harrison was assigned as lead investigator. The FBI was contacted, child abduction fell under federal jurisdiction, and Special Agent Rebecca Chen arrived from the Portland field office. This was no longer a lost child who might wander home. This was every parent's nightmare, unfolding in real time. By 5:30, approximately 40 to 50 volunteers had organized into grid search teams. Each group of 4 or 5 people assigned specific blocks radiating out from the park. Police coordinated with whistles and radios. At 6 o'clock, canine units arrived. The dogs were given Emma's pillowcase from home for her scent. They tracked from the swing set to the park entrance, to the parking area, and there the trail simply vanished. The scent stopped at the pavement, suggesting Emma had been placed into a vehicle. The dogs circled, confused, unable to pick up anything beyond that point. A helicopter from Oregon State Police swept overhead with thermal imaging cameras, searching a 5-mile radius for any heat signature matching a small child. They focused on wooded areas near the Willamette River, abandoned buildings, anywhere a child might be hidden. They found nothing. On foot, volunteers searched arm's length apart in some areas, looking in dumpsters, parked cars, garages, under porches. By 8 o'clock, a dive team was searching the riverbank. Though it was half a mile from the park, they found no evidence. In the first 24 hours, searchers covered a 1-mile radius thoroughly on foot, a 5-mile radius by helicopter. 47 homes were searched with owner permission. Every building within 10 blocks was checked, and they found nothing. No red jacket, no white sneakers, no Bun Bun the stuffed rabbit, no fabric scraps, no signs of struggle. It was as if Emma had simply evaporated from that swing. At 6:30 that evening, local news interrupted regular programming with breaking news. Emma's photograph appeared on television screens across Portland, a recent picture showing her bright smile and green eyes. A tip line was established. By the 10 o'clock news, the story was the lead on every station. Linda made a brief statement, barely able to stand, her voice breaking. "Please, if anyone has seen Emma, if anyone knows anything, please call. I just want my baby home." The tip line number scrolled across screens continuously. By midnight, the story had been picked up by regional news in Seattle and Sacramento. By the next day, it would be national. Through that first endless night, the search continued under floodlights. Volunteers brought thermoses of coffee and refused to go home. The community center became a coordination hub. Local businesses donated copying for flyers, food for searchers. The Portland Trailblazers contributed $5,000 to a reward fund that was growing by the hour. By dawn on May 13th, 127 tips had come into the police line. None were immediately credible. Forensic teams processed the playground as thoroughly as any crime scene, photographing every inch, examining the swing set for fingerprints. They found multiple prints, as expected on public equipment, but none that would prove useful. The ground beneath the swing showed disturbance from Emma's feet dragging while she swung, but no other marks. The parking area revealed tire tracks, but too many vehicles had been there to isolate anything specific. There was no blood, no torn fabric, no footprints in the few muddy patches. The evidence team collected fingerprint samples, photographed tire impressions, took soil samples, but what they collected meant nothing without something to compare it to. Investigators interviewed 89 people in the first 48 hours. Patricia Novak, the last person besides Linda to see Emma, confirmed she'd noticed Emma on the swing at 3:43. She hadn't seen anyone approach the playground, hadn't noticed any vehicles arriving or leaving around the time Emma vanished. The two basketball boys, Marcus Thompson and Deshaun Miller, were absorbed in their game. When questioned, Marcus thought he maybe remembered a dark-colored van in the parking area earlier, around 3:30, but he couldn't be sure. Neither boy saw Emma leave or anyone approach her. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gladys Chen, who lived adjacent to the park, had been in her kitchen with a window facing the playground. She'd seen Emma swinging earlier, around 3:35, but had gone to answer the phone and missed the critical window. She did, however, remember something that made detectives take notice. Earlier that afternoon, around 2 o'clock, she'd seen a man in a dark jacket standing near the fence, just watching. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it. Now, trying to recall details, she could only say he was a white male, somewhere in his 30s or 40s, with dark hair, average height, wearing a dark jacket. The description was frustratingly vague. Another neighbor, Mr. Bernard Foster, had been working in his garage with the door open. He'd seen what he described as a dark blue or black van drive slowly past around 3:40. The vehicle was older, maybe from the 1970s, kind of beat up in his words. He hadn't seen the driver clearly, hadn't seen it stop, wasn't sure which direction it went. It was just one detail among hundreds, but detectives noted it carefully. On May 14th, 2 days after Emma's disappearance, an anonymous tip came into the police line. A woman's voice, never identified, said simply, "You should look at Charles Ford. He lives near the park, and he's been watching kids." She provided an address, 847 Southeast Morrison Street, just 4 blocks from Riverside Park, and hung up. Detective Harrison and Agent Chen went to the address immediately. Charles Ford, age 38, lived alone in a small rental house. He was unemployed at the time, having previously worked construction. He'd never married, had no children, and had one arrest on his record from 1982 for trespassing, though the charges had been dropped. When detectives knocked on his door, Ford agreed to speak with them. Though he appeared nervous from the moment he saw their badges, Ford denied knowing anything about Emma's disappearance. He claimed he'd been home alone on the afternoon of May 12th, with no one to verify his whereabouts. He was sweating, fidgeting, his answers vague and inconsistent when they asked him to describe his day. When they asked if they could search his house, he agreed. The detectives found a cluttered, dirty space with no immediate evidence that a child had ever been there. No red jacket, no children's items, no obvious signs of a crime. But they noticed things that raised their suspicions. No photographs of family or friends displayed anywhere, which struck them as unusual. In the basement, they found a mattress on the floor and a coiled rope in the corner. Not illegal, but unsettling. Ford owned a 1976 Dodge van. It was dark blue, matching the witness description. He allowed forensics to examine it. Over the next 2 days, technicians went through that van thoroughly, looking for any trace of Emma. They found no blood evidence, no fibers matching her clothing, no fingerprints except Ford's own. The van was dirty and cluttered with tools, but there was nothing definitive to tie it to the case. Charles Ford had no alibi for the afternoon Emma vanished, but no one could disprove his claim that he'd been home alone either. The corner store clerk didn't remember seeing him that day, but it had been busy and she couldn't say he hadn't been there. When detectives asked Ford if he liked children, he replied, "Not particularly," in a way that struck them as odd. When they requested he take a polygraph test, he refused, which was his legal right but raised further suspicion. His brother Henry, when questioned, reluctantly admitted that Charles had problems and that he didn't trust him around kids but wouldn't elaborate further. Detective Harrison was convinced Ford was involved. But conviction and evidence were two different things. There was no physical evidence linking Ford to Emma, no witnesses who'd seen him at the park that day. And while his van matched a description, so did dozens of other vehicles in Portland. The district attorney was blunt. "Suspicion isn't enough. We need evidence or a confession." Police maintained surveillance on Ford's house for 2 weeks, watching his movements, hoping he would lead them to Emma or make a mistake. He rarely left the house. He had no contact with children. There was nothing. On May 28th, when detectives went to question Ford again, he was gone. The landlord said Ford had moved out the day before, paid through the end of the month, and left no forwarding address. His van was also missing. Police issued a be-on-the-lookout alert for Charles Ford and his vehicle. They never found him. As the second week began, the massive search efforts began to wind down. The reality of diminishing returns set in. They'd covered every reasonable area, followed every credible lead, and found nothing. The FBI agents had to return to other cases. The volunteers, exhausted and heartbroken, had to return to their jobs. The news cameras, which had been constant fixtures in the neighborhood, began packing up their equipment. The story was slipping from front pages, replaced by newer tragedies. By the end of May, the tip line calls had dropped from hundreds per day to just 2 or 3 per week. And most weren't credible, well-meaning people who thought they'd seen a girl who might be Emma in another state, psychics offering help, vague suspicions about neighbors. Detective Harrison followed up on 34 leads he considered genuinely worth pursuing. None led to Emma. In Linda Bennett's house, time had stopped on May 12th. Emma's bed remained untouched, the rainbow comforter still pulled up neatly. Her breakfast bowl sat in the dish drainer, washed but not put away. Her finger painting from daycare stayed on the refrigerator. Linda couldn't bring herself to move anything, to acknowledge in any way that Emma might not be coming back. She returned to Riverside Park every Tuesday and Thursday, sitting on the same bench, staring at the swings, waiting for something she knew logically wouldn't happen but couldn't stop hoping for. By November of 1987, 6 months after Emma's disappearance, the case had officially gone cold. Detective Harrison was assigned other investigations. Though he kept Emma's file on his desk and reviewed it quarterly, the tip line was still active, but rarely rang. Media coverage appeared only on anniversaries. Linda had been forced to return to work, her savings depleted despite the community fundraiser. She spent every spare moment at the copy shop, printing new flyers to post in neighboring towns. She drove for hours, stapling Emma's photo to telephone poles, asking strangers if they'd seen her daughter. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she still returned to Riverside Park, sitting on that bench, keeping her vigil. On the first anniversary of Emma's disappearance, in May of 1988, 200 people attended a vigil at Riverside Park. Linda spoke briefly, her voice stronger than it had been but still carrying an ocean of pain. "I know Emma is out there. I will never stop looking." Local news covered the anniversary, and there was a brief surge of tips, but none led anywhere. The case was formally moved to cold case status. Charles Ford had never been located. No social security activity, no new address, nothing. He had disappeared as completely as Emma had. By 1989 and 1990, Linda's life had become entirely consumed by her search for Emma. She joined national missing children organizations, attended every conference, learned about advocacy and databases and search techniques. She kept Emma's room exactly as it had been on May 12, 1987. The bed, the stuffed animals, the finger painting on the wall, it all remained, growing into something like a shrine. Linda's sister Diane worried that Linda was stuck in time, unable to move forward, but Linda refused therapy. "I can't move on," she said simply. "Emma needs me to remember." Every May 12th, Linda organized a vigil at Riverside Park. The attendance dwindled over the years. 200 in 1988, 50 in 1992, 20 in 1996. But Linda was there every year, every minute, lighting candles, speaking Emma's name, refusing to let the community forget. Every January 15th, Emma's birthday, Linda baked Mickey Mouse chocolate chip pancakes and set a place at the table for her daughter. She calculated Emma's age. Emma would be 6 today. Emma would be 10 today, and bought a birthday present, wrapped it carefully, and added it to the growing collection in Emma's closet. By 2005, there were 18 wrapped presents piled there, gifts for birthdays that had passed unmarked by the child they were meant for. Detective Harrison retired in 1995 and passed the case to Detective Patricia Kim. She reviewed the file thoroughly, looking for new angles, but found nothing that hadn't already been explored. Technological advances were happening. Early DNA databases were being established, but they didn't help when there was no physical evidence to test. In 1994, Linda remarried. John Westbrook was a kind man who accepted Linda's mission to find Emma, who understood that loving Linda meant accepting that part of her would always be in May of 1987, waiting at that playground. They moved to a smaller house but stayed in the same neighborhood. John helped Linda with flyer campaigns and never asked her to let go. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Linda had come to a quiet, terrible understanding. Statistically, Emma was likely gone in a way that meant she would never come home, but Linda refused to accept it emotionally. "Until I have proof, she's alive," she told John, and he nodded and held her hand. When Elizabeth Smart was found alive in 2003 after 9 months missing, Linda's hope reignited like a flame that had been waiting for oxygen. "If Elizabeth came home, Emma can too," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. What Linda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that 300 miles north, in a small farmhouse outside Bellingham, Washington, a woman named Margaret Collins was raising a little girl she called Sarah. The child had been told her name was Sarah Ann Collins, that she'd been born on January 20th, 1983, that Margaret was the only mother she'd ever had. The girl had no memory of life before age 4, no recollection of a woman with brown hair who sang "You Are My Sunshine," no conscious awareness of Mickey Mouse pancakes or a stuffed rabbit named Bun Bun, or a playground with metal swings that creaked in the Portland rain. On May 13th, 1987, approximately 6 hours after Emma vanished from Riverside Park, Charles Ford had pulled his dark blue van into Margaret Collins's driveway. Margaret was 52 years old, a childless widow who'd been alone since her husband passed away 3 years earlier. Charles Ford was connected to her through a complicated relationship. He'd once dated her sister Janet, who had passed away in 1985. When Ford knocked on her door that night, he was carrying a crying, terrified 4-year-old girl in a red jacket. Ford told Margaret a story. He said the child's mother was struggling with substances, that she'd abandoned her daughter, that he was saving her from a terrible situation. Margaret, lonely and perhaps choosing to believe what she wanted to hear, agreed to take the child. She gave Ford $3,000, her life savings, and he left immediately, driving into the night. Emma never saw him again. Ford would pass away in 1995 from a heart attack in low-income housing in Vancouver, Washington, his secrets buried with him. Those first days in Margaret's house were terrifying for Emma. She cried constantly for her mommy, refused to eat, couldn't sleep. Margaret attempted comfort in her way, repeating over and over, "I'm your mother now. Your old mommy didn't want you. You're safe with me. Your name is Sarah. Say it, Sarah." Emma resisted at first, insisting she was Emma, that she wanted to go home, that this wasn't right. But Margaret was patient and firm, and Emma was 4 years old and alone and frightened. Gradually, over weeks and months, resistance gave way to confused acceptance. Margaret lived in a rural area outside Bellingham, on 15 acres with the nearest neighbor half a mile away. There was no television in the house. Margaret didn't believe in it. There was a radio, but Margaret controlled what Emma heard. There were no phone calls, no contact with other children. Margaret homeschooled Emma, keeping her completely isolated for the first year. The isolation served multiple purposes. It prevented anyone from questioning Emma's origins, and it ensured that Emma's memories of her old life would fade without reinforcement. Sometime in 1988 or 89, Margaret obtained a forged birth certificate. How she got it, whether through black market contacts or some other means, was never fully determined. The document listed Sarah Ann Collins, born January 20th, 1983, with Margaret listed as mother, and no father named. This single piece of paper would allow Emma to exist as Sarah for the next 18 years, enrolled in school at age 13, obtaining a driver's license at 16, moving through the world with an identity built on lies. The transformation from Emma to Sarah happened gradually. Between ages 4 and 6, Emma's memories of Linda, of her real life, began to fade like photographs left in sunlight. Margaret wasn't physically abusive, but she was emotionally controlling, strict, and isolated Emma from any influence that might raise questions. By age 7, Emma rarely thought about the vague dreams she sometimes had of a woman with brown hair singing to her. When she asked Margaret, "Did I have another mommy?" Margaret would say firmly, "No, you've always been mine," and Sarah would accept it because she had no framework for understanding that it might be a falsehood. Through her teenage years, Sarah felt different in ways she couldn't articulate. She had recurring dreams of a playground, of metal swings creaking, of the smell of rain on pine needles. She would wake with tears on her face and not understand why. The color red made her feel safe in a way she couldn't explain. The smell of chocolate chip pancakes sometimes made her cry without reason. She drew pictures of playgrounds obsessively in her art class, and when her teacher commented on it, Sarah just shrugged and said she guessed she liked playgrounds. At age 18, in 2001, Sarah left Margaret's house for community college in Astoria, Oregon. She never lived with Margaret full-time again. She moved through her late teens and early 20s working cafe jobs, moving between small coastal towns, never feeling settled or rooted anywhere. She told herself she was just restless by nature, but the truth was deeper and more painful. She was searching for something she couldn't name, pulled towards something she couldn't identify. And then in October 2005, 18 years after Emma vanished from that swing set, a 22-year-old woman named Sarah Collins received an envelope in her apartment mailbox. There was no return address, just her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded, clearly from the 1980s based on the quality. It showed a little girl, approximately 4 years old, with brown hair in 2 braids and huge green eyes, wearing a distinctive red quilted jacket. She was standing in front of a swing set, a playground visible in the background with chain-link fence and pine trees. Sarah stared at the photograph, standing in her kitchen, feeling vertigo wash over her. She didn't recognize the girl, didn't consciously realize it was her own face looking back from 2 decades past. But something about the image felt urgent, important, impossible to ignore. The swing set looked familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. The red jacket triggered something wordless and deep. When she turned the photograph over, she found a message written in neat blue ink. Do you remember this place? For 3 days, Sarah couldn't stop looking at the photograph. She propped it on her kitchen counter and stared at it while eating. She brought it to work at the cafe and snuck glances during slow moments. Her dreams intensified. The same playground from the photo appearing in her sleep. The sound of chains creaking. A woman's voice calling a name she couldn't quite make out. Red fabric flapping in the wind. She woke multiple times crying and didn't know why. The pull to find this place became overwhelming, irresistible, like a voice inside her saying you have to go back even though she'd never been there, at least not in any memory she could access. On October 18th, Sarah called in at the cafe, packed a duffel bag with a few clothes and the photograph, withdrew $200 from her account, all she had, and caught a Greyhound bus heading south to Portland. She couldn't have explained why if someone had asked. She just knew, with certainty that bypassed logic, that she had to find that playground. At the same time, Detective Patricia Kim was sitting at her desk in Portland, reviewing old case files as she often did during quiet moments. When her phone rang and her former colleague Dave Martinez said, "You're not going to believe this, but I think the Bennett girl is back at the playground," Kim felt 18 years of frustration and sadness crystallize into sudden, sharp focus. Martinez, who'd worked peripherally on Emma's case in 1987 and now volunteered with Neighborhood Watch, had seen a young woman at Riverside Park that morning. Early 20s, brown hair, green eyes, standing at the swing set and staring at it like she was seeing a ghost. He'd looked at age progression photos of Emma Bennett 1,000 times over the years. The resemblance was unmistakable. Kim pulled Emma's case file immediately and compared the age progression photo created in 2002 by the FBI to Martinez's description. It matched. She drove to Riverside Park, but the young woman was gone. Kim sat in her car, mind racing. She ran a database search for anyone matching the description. Sarah Collins, born January 20th, 1983, current address in Astoria. Kim pulled the driver's license photo and compared it to Emma's last known photograph from 1987. The resemblance was undeniable. When Kim requested the birth certificate for Sarah Collins from Washington State, red flags appeared immediately. There was no hospital birth record. The certificate had been issued in 1989, 6 years after the supposed birth date, which was highly unusual. Kim began building a case quietly, not wanting to raise false hope. She discovered that Charles Ford, the primary suspect in Emma's abduction, had passed away in 1995. But digging deeper into his background, she found his connection to Margaret Collins through his deceased ex-girlfriend. Margaret lived in Bellingham, Washington, in a rural farmhouse she'd owned since the mid-'80s. The pieces were falling into place, but Kim needed more. She stationed herself near Riverside Park in an unmarked car, waiting for the young woman to return. Sarah checked into a budget motel on Sandy Boulevard and spent the next few days driving and walking through Portland neighborhoods, following an instinct she didn't understand. She kept returning to Riverside Park, drawn to it like metal to a magnet. Each time she stood at the swing set, touching the cold chains, she felt something building inside her. Not quite memory, but an echo of memory, a shadow of truth trying to break through. On October 23, 2005, at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon, 18 years to the minute after she'd vanished, Sarah Collins stood at the swing set with her hand on the chain, and something inside her broke open. Memories didn't flood back fully formed, but fragments began to surface. The feeling of swinging high, of laughter, of safety shattered in an instant. She began to cry without knowing why, her body remembering what her mind had locked away. Detective Kim, watching from her car, decided it was time. She walked across the park toward Sarah, who tensed as a stranger approached. Kim kept her voice gentle, non-threatening. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah turned, eyes red. "I'm fine. I just This place. I feel like I've been here before. Kim took a breath. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Collins. Kim's heart rate accelerated. This was her. Sarah, I'm Detective Patricia Kim with Portland Police. I need to ask you something that's going to sound strange. Do you know where you were born? Sarah looked confused and slightly alarmed. Bellingham, Washington. Why are you asking me this? Do you have memories from before you were 4 years old? No. Margaret, my mother, said I. Why are you asking me this? Sarah's voice was rising, fear creeping in. Kim spoke with careful compassion. Because 18 years ago, a 4-year-old girl named Emma Louise Bennett was taken from this playground. And Sarah, I think that girl was you. Sarah's immediate reaction was denial. That's insane. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt them ring hollow. The playground, the dreams, the photograph, it all clicked into terrible, perfect alignment. She pulled the photograph from her pocket with shaking hands and showed it to Kim. Kim looked at it and felt the confirmation settle in her bones. This was Emma Bennett's last photograph, taken by Linda just days before the abduction. Sarah, that little girl in the photograph is you. Your real name is Emma Bennett. Your mother has been looking for you for 18 years. The next 72 hours were a blur of police stations and DNA tests and phone calls that would change lives. Kim contacted Linda, now Linda Westbrook, with words she'd dreamed of saying for nearly 2 decades. Linda, I need you to sit down. We may have found Emma. Linda's scream of hope and terror was something Kim would never forget. Linda rushed to the police station. DNA swabs were taken from both women and sent to the lab with urgent priority. While they waited for confirmation, Sarah insisted on confronting Margaret. The drive to Bellingham took 2.5 hours. Sarah was silent most of the way, staring out the window at landscape that should have been familiar but felt alien. Kim offered to wait, to let Sarah process everything first, but Sarah shook her head. I need to hear it from her. Margaret's farmhouse looked different to Sarah now. Not like the home she'd grown up in, but like a prison she hadn't known she was trapped in. When Sarah knocked and Margaret opened the door, the older woman's face confirmed everything. She saw Sarah, saw the detective behind her, and her shoulders sagged with the weight of 18 years of lies finally catching up. Sarah, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I knew you'd come eventually. Inside the house that smelled of old books and lavender, Sarah asked the question that would shatter 2 decades of carefully constructed fiction. Tell me the truth. Am I Emma Bennett? Margaret, 70 years old and frail, began to cry. Yes, your name was Emma. I'm so sorry. The confession spilled out. Charles Ford had brought Emma to her in May of '87, claiming he'd saved her from a mother who didn't want her. Margaret had chosen to believe it, or had convinced herself it was true, because she was lonely and desperate for a child to fill the emptiness in her life. She'd given Ford money, taken Emma, and when she realized within days that the story didn't make sense, this well-cared-for child who cried for her mommy, it was already too late. Margaret was attached. She made the decision to keep Emma, to change her identity, to build a life on the foundation of someone else's tragedy. Did you know Emma was a missing child? Did you see the news coverage? Kim asked. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I saw her on the news. I knew, but by then I'd already told her I was her mother, so I kept her hidden until the news died down. Then I moved us here, where no one knew us. Sarah ran outside and was sick in the yard, her entire understanding of her life crumbling. Everything she'd believed about herself, about her childhood, about the woman who'd raised her, all of it was built on stolen ground. On October 26th, the DNA results came back. 99.9% probability that Sarah Collins was the biological daughter of Linda Westbrook, née Bennett. Detective Kim made 2 phone calls. It's confirmed. She's Emma. Margaret was arrested and charged with kidnapping, custodial interference, forgery, and child endangerment. The reunion between Linda and Emma was arranged for October 27th in a private conference room at the police station. Both women were briefed by trauma counselors. Linda was told, she may not remember you. She may not feel what you feel. This will take time. Emma was told, you don't have to call her mom. You don't have to feel anything. Just meet her. When the door opened and they saw each other for the first time in 18 years, The moment wasn't cinematic or orchestrated by background music. It was raw and complicated and painful. Linda saw her daughter, grown, Emma's face in a 22-year-old woman, and wanted to run to her, but held herself back. Emma saw a stranger who was crying, a woman with brown hair streaked with gray and green eyes that mirrored her own, vaguely, hauntingly familiar. "Emma," Linda whispered. "Oh, Emma." Sarah flinched at the name. I I don't remember you." "I know," Linda said through tears. "That's okay. We have time." Linda stepped closer but didn't touch, respecting the counselor's advice. "Can I just look at you?" Emma nodded, uncomfortable but allowing it. Linda stared, drinking in every detail, counting freckles, noticing height and features, seeing her little girl transformed into a woman she'd never had the chance to know. "They said you never stopped looking for me," Emma said, struggling with the words. "Never. Not one day. I knew you were out there." There was an awkward pause, heavy with 18 years of absence. "I don't know how to be your daughter," Emma said finally. "You don't have to be anything," Linda replied, crying harder. "You just have to be here. That's enough." Linda reached out, her hand slowly. Emma hesitated, then took it. Their hands touched, mother and daughter, for the first time in 18 years. It wasn't a Hollywood embrace. Emma pulled away after a moment. "I'm sorry. This is just a lot." "I understand. We'll go slow." They talked for 20 minutes, Linda sharing small details about who Emma had been. "You loved swings. You always wanted to go higher. You made Mickey Mouse pancakes with me every Tuesday." Emma felt flickers of something. Recognition? Déjà vu? She wasn't sure. When Linda mentioned a stuffed rabbit named Bun Bun, Emma said softly, "I draw rabbits sometimes. I don't know why." "You loved rabbits," Linda said, and they both cried. Margaret Collins pled guilty to all charges in November 2005. At the sentencing hearing in December, the judge spoke of stolen years and irrecoverable time. Margaret received 15 years in federal prison, eligible for parole after 10. In her final statement, she said, "I have no defense for what I did. I stole a child from her mother. I told myself I was saving her, but I was only serving myself. I was lonely and selfish. I know I can't undo what I did." Margaret was sent to a federal facility in California. She would pass away from illness in 2011 at age 76. Quote, Emma didn't attend the funeral, later telling her therapist, "I've forgiven her, but I can't forget, and I don't owe her my presence." The legal system could punish Margaret Collins with years in a cell. It could close the case file and stamp it resolved. But the law couldn't restore 18 years of memories. It couldn't rebuild a mother-daughter bond that had been severed when Emma was 4. In the months that followed, Emma and Linda navigated the complicated terrain of becoming family. Emma moved into a small guest house behind Linda's house, close but separate, a compromise. She couldn't immediately switch to being called Emma, so she asked people to use Emma Sarah for the first year, gradually shortening it as the name began to feel like her own. Therapy became Emma's anchor. Dr. Rita Alvarez helped her process trauma she couldn't consciously remember, grief for a childhood that had been stolen, complicated feelings about Margaret that included both love and betrayal. Memory returned in fragments, Linda's voice singing, the taste of chocolate chip pancakes, the feeling of swinging high. But most of her early childhood remained locked away, lost to the passage of time and the suppression necessary for survival. Building a relationship with Linda was slow, awkward work. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week for coffee, walks, shared meals. Conversations were stilted at first, both women trying too hard. In May 2006, 1 year after Emma's discovery, she had a panic attack and called Linda instinctively. When Linda came immediately and held her while she cried, the word "mom" slipped out accidentally. Both women cried, and it felt like a breakthrough, a small victory in a long war. By 2007, Emma had enrolled at Portland State University, studying psychology because understanding her own experience felt like the only way to make sense of it. She kept a low profile despite media interest, made a few friends slowly, and continued weekly therapy. Her relationship with Linda grew more natural, more comfortable. Sunday dinners became ritual. Emma sometimes slept in her old bedroom, the one Linda had kept unchanged for 18 years. It still wasn't a typical mother-daughter closeness, but it was genuine and growing. Emma contacted her biological father, Robert Bennett, in 2006. He'd followed her case after she was found and had sent letters. They met once. It was awkward. He'd built a new life in California with a new family, and Emma decided minimal contact was best. He'd left when she was 2, long before the abduction. Their connection was biology without foundation. In 2007, Oregon passed legislation that became known informally as Emma's Law, requiring birth certificates to include hospital verification, making it harder to forge documents for abducted children. By 2012, 12 other states had adopted similar measures. Emma's case became part of FBI training for missing persons investigators, emphasizing that cases should never be abandoned, that advances in technology and databases can solve decades-old mysteries, that hope isn't foolish even when years pass. Emma graduated from Portland State in 2010 and began working as a victims advocate for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She specialized in helping recovered missing persons reintegrate into their lives, using her own experience to guide others through impossible terrain. Her advocacy work directly helped 3 other families find long-lost children between 2007 and 2012. Her story gave hope to families of missing children across the nation. In 2011, Emma married Patrick Chen, a childhood friend of her cousin whom she'd met at a family gathering. In 2012, at age 29, she was expecting her first child, a daughter. She and Linda were close now. Their relationship transformed from strangers sharing DNA to genuine family built through years of patient work. Linda was deeply involved in preparations for her grandchild, a role she'd feared she'd never have. One afternoon in October 2012, 7 years after her discovery, Emma stood at Riverside Park with Linda beside her, Linda's hand on her shoulder. Emma's pregnant belly was visible beneath her coat. They were at the swing set, the same swing where Emma had been taken at age 4, the same swing that had called her back at age 22. "I'm going to tell her the story," Emma said. "When she's old enough." "What will you tell her?" Linda asked. "That her grandmother never stopped looking. That truth doesn't disappear. That even when everything is taken from you, you can still find your way home." They stood together in silence. The chains creaked softly in the Portland breeze. The sound that once meant devastation now transformed into something else: survival, resilience, the persistence of love beyond memory. If Emma's story reminds you of anything, let it be this: that love persists beyond memory, that hope isn't foolish even when years pass, and that the truth, no matter how long buried, will find its way to the surface. Emma was saved because a mother refused to forget, a detective refused to dismiss a lead, and because Emma herself, without knowing why, trusted the voice inside that whispered, "Go back." Margaret Collins's lies were ultimately shattered by the one thing she couldn't control: the unbreakable thread that connects a mother to her child, even across 18 years of silence. That thread brought Emma home. And in the end, that's the truth that matters most. What are your thoughts on Emma's story? Do you believe memory can disappear, or does something always remain beneath the surface, waiting to guide us home? We'd love to hear what stayed with you most. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe the truth is always worth waiting for, consider subscribing to the channel.